For the past month or so, Europe and America have been trying to decide on Bosnia's next High Representative, the closest thing that Europe has to a viceroy, following the sudden resignation of incumbent Christopher Schmidt in May. However, the process has been upended by Washington's insistence on both Schmidt's immediate removal and their insistence on an unqualified Italian as his replacement. So in this video, we're going to explain why America and Europe have been fighting over Bosnia, and why it probably has something to do with a slightly dodgy billion-dollar Bosnian pipeline contract recently handed out to one of Trump's cronies. Recent elections in Denmark, Slovenia, Bulgaria and Hungary have shaken up the state of European politics, with major new trends emerging. We dissect these elections in the latest issue of our magazine, as well as explaining what's changing in Europe. That's just one of the 80 pages in the magazine, because there's more to Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, to understand this story, you need to know a bit about Bosnia's rather funky governance structure, as established by the 1995 Dayton Peace Accords, which ended the bloody Bosnian War. The Dayton Accords split Bosnia into a highly decentralized state, creating two so-called sectarian entities: Republika Srpska, mostly made up of ethnic Serbs, and the Federation, mostly made up of Bosniaks and Croats. Both the Federation and Republika Srpska are then bound together by a number of joint central institutions, including the Constitutional Court, the tripartite rotating presidency, and Bosnia's bicameral legislature. Despite this very elaborate governance structure, political consensus is rare, because none of the nationalist parties in power are happy with how much representation they get. Broadly speaking, the Croats feel underrepresented, the Serbs aren't happy about being tied to Bosnia, and the Bosniaks, despite being the majority, can't act without the others. This is the main reason that floating above all of this is the High Representative, a foreign official with near limitless powers responsible for overseeing the implementation of the Dayton Agreement and making sure that ethnic divisions don't totally deadlock the Bosnian state. Unsurprisingly, the High Representative is a controversial figure because, well, it has pretty colonial vibes. Paddy Ashdown was memorably nicknamed the Viceroy of Bosnia during his stint. The High Representative also doesn't have a set term length and is appointed by the Peace Implementation Council Steering Board, made up of the US, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Canada, the EU and Russia, although Russia essentially withdrew from the process in 2021. Interestingly, there's not actually a defined voting mechanism here either. The PIC just sort of come together for a chinwag, and a consensus is supposed to emerge. And, well, this is what Europe and the US are arguing about at the moment. The latest High Representative, Christian Schmidt, a German who's held the position since 2021, suddenly announced his resignation in May of this year, citing, quote, huge and unexpected pressure from the US. In June, the PIC held a meeting to decide on his successor, but was unable to come to a consensus. Most European states supported France's envoy to the Western Balkans, René Trocas, but the Trump administration adamantly insisted on Italian diplomat Antonio Zanardi Landi and publicly threatened to withdraw from the process if they don't get their way. The US also apparently insisted that Schmidt step down immediately, reneging on a previous agreement that Schmidt would stay on until the expected elections in October, for reasons of continuity. There was then another meeting on Tuesday, but again the PIC were unable to agree on a candidate, although the US was able to force Schmidt to step down in favour of a temporary replacement in US diplomat Louis Krychok. This has all left the rest of the PIC slightly bemused by both the Trump administration's hurried insistence and their choice of candidate, because, well, Landi has no significant previous experience or knowledge of Bosnia. So what's going on here? Why is the US apparently so intent on pushing out Schmidt and replacing him with a relatively underqualified Italian? Well, we don't want to sound too conspiratorial here. It almost definitely has something to do with the proposed pipeline called the Southern Interconnection. The basic idea behind the Southern Interconnection is to connect Bosnia's gas network to an LNG terminal on the Croatian coast, thus reducing its dependence on Russia, which currently accounts for basically 100% of Bosnia's gas imports. The Biden administration tried to get Bosnia's state gas company to start work on the project, but was blocked by Republika Srpska, who, under the Dayton Accords power-sharing framework, gets a veto. At the time, the president of Republika Srpska was an ultra-nationalist and pro-Russian politician called Milorad Dodik, who had basically been the de facto leader of Republika Srpska for the past 2 decades, and had spent most of that time flirting with secession and spatting with the High Representative. But last year, Bosnia's highest court forced him to step down and forbade him from political activity for 6 years, after Dodik was convicted of defying the High Representative. But Dodik remains Republika Srpska's de facto leader. However, early this year, Dodik suddenly U-turned, approved the project, and gave the $1 billion contract for it to an American company called AAFS, without any competitive tender. AAFS has no record of attempting a project anywhere close to this scale, but what it does have is personal connections to Donald Trump. Its two known shareholders are Jesse Binnall, one of Trump's lawyers, and Joe Flynn, a former Trump advisor and the brother of Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., looks like he might also be somehow involved. In April, for instance, Dodik took the unusual step of organizing an event in his honor at Banja Luka, the main city in Republika Srpska, where Donald Trump Jr. extolled the virtues of American gas. Now, until this spat over the High Representative, the quid pro quo looks pretty obvious. Dodik would withdraw his opposition to the pipeline and handed the lucrative contract to Trump's mates, and in exchange, Trump would lift the Biden-era sanctions on Dodik, which is exactly what happened without explanation in October. However, this recent transatlantic spat over the next High Representative suggests that there could be something more to it. As we see it, there are basically two possible explanations here. The first is that the US just wants to make sure that the next High Representative doesn't get in the way of the project. This would explain why they were so keen to get rid of Schmidt, who's been likely critical of the project and the way that the contracts were handed out. The second, and slightly scarier potential explanation, however, is that the US is doing Dodik's bidding here. In other words, in exchange for Dodik withdrawing his veto, the US has agreed to not only withdraw the Biden-era sanctions, but also force through a High Representative who might be more amenable to Dodik's agenda. This might mean just not confronting Dodik as aggressively as Schmidt did, or in the more extreme scenario, it might mean acceding to Dodik's separatist demands. Either way, this is all bad news for Bosnia, and adds another layer of dysfunction to its already dysfunctional politics. And if you're thinking that that was a lot to take on top of the thousands of other stories happening around the globe right now, you're not wrong. You might even feel powerless in today's climate, and we promise you, you're not alone in that. If, like us, you're looking for evidence that people can still make a difference, we know exactly the place to go. And that place is Planet Wild. Planet Wild is a community-based nature protection organization that is passionate about helping our planet, one step at a time. The power we have as a collective really shines bright through Planet Wild, as your membership directly funds a mission every month to give our planet a helping hand. These missions span from ensuring the ongoing survival of endangered animals like the grizzly bear, to cleaning up rivers before plastic reaches the ocean, and even rewilding Europe's last ancient forest. And with Planet Wild, you can know exactly what you're funding. They don't leave you wondering where your money is going, because they document all of these missions in video reports here on YouTube, so we can see exactly what we've helped to achieve. The impact we've made will be right before our eyes. Planet Wild is for those who are tired of words and want to see action. So if you want to join the growing community of people committed to actually making a difference, you can do so for as little as $6 a month, and every contribution matters, big or small. And if that hasn't convinced you, the first 100 people to sign up and use code NEWSEU6 will get their first month's membership paid for entirely by us. That's how passionate we are about Planet Wild. So by joining today, you'll immediately be able to make a difference, and even see the impact you're having in less than 30 days on YouTube right here. You can cancel your membership at any time, so there's absolutely no catch. Just an easy, remarkable way to create real and lasting change. If you want to see them in action, then check out their latest mission protecting grizzly bears and other species by building the largest wildlife corridor in America.